2020 World Press Freedom Index and recommend Tanzania: first, to repeal or amend national legislation that restricts civil society, like human rights defenders and journalists, from exercising their rights and fundamental freedoms without fear for scrutiny and reprisals, including the three relevant acts so that it complies with international standards. And secondly, to strengthen the legal protection of individuals belonging to the most vulnerable groups, among which sexual minorities and women, and ensure prevention and investigation of all forms of violence, including domestic and sexual violence and female genital mutilation. The Netherlands wishes Tanzania much success with the follow-up of all recommendations.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nigeria on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Among which
Nigeria warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the presentation of the country's report and commends its efforts to national, regional, and international human rights obligations. We applaud the government of Tanzania for successfully implementing the first National Human Rights Action Plan and note with satisfaction efforts put in place to reinforce its institutional frameworks to promote and protect the rights and fundamental freedoms of the people of Tanzania. While acknowledging the genuine efforts and commitments of the government of Tanzania to promote and protect the fundamental rights of its people, we wish to recommend the need to: 1. Sustain efforts and commitment in protecting the rights of women, children, and people with disabilities, and 2. To seek international cooperation and technical assistance and capacity building in the field of human rights. Finally, we wish Tanzania a very successful review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Norway for a video statement.
Norway welcomes the government of Tanzania's National Action Plan on Violence Against Women and Children, as well as the progress made towards finalizing the text of the National Human Rights Action Plan. Norway recommends that Tanzania 1. Takes urgent steps to amend legislation to outlaw all forms of child marriage, safeguards women's rights to sexual and reproductive health, and ends violence against women and children. 2. Protect children's rights to access to health and education by abolishing corporal punishment in schools. 3. Fully respects and protects the rights to freedom of assembly and freedom of expression and enshrines in the law the right to a safe and enabling environment for human rights defenders, journalists, and media workers. 4. Approves and implements reforms to strengthen the independence of the judiciary and to strengthen citizens' access to justice and legal aid. 5. Abolishes the death penalty in all circumstances. I thank you.
Thank you, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We welcome and thank the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania for the comprehensive presentation of its third UPR report. We commend Tanzania's cooperation with human rights mechanisms. Tanzania has taken multiple legislative and administrative steps to promote enjoyment of human rights since its last UPR. Despite resource constraints, we appreciate Tanzania's commitment to comply with its human rights obligation. Strengthening the Commission for Human Rights and promoting its compliance with the Paris Principle with Status A are noteworthy developments. We also welcome the implementation of plans to combat violence against women and children, reduce child labor, and protect rights of persons with disabilities. We recommend Tanzania to expedite ongoing efforts aimed at early finalization of second National Human Rights Plan, continue with steps to implement third National Development Plan for achieving progress towards SDGs, and continue its cooperation with Human Rights Council and its mechanism, including special procedures. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. And the next speaker is the Philippines with a video statement.
Thank you, Chair. The Philippines warmly welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and thanks it for its national report. We welcome Tanzania's constructive approach to the UPR session and acknowledges the efforts made by the government in the areas of poverty reduction and access to adequate standard of living. In a constructive spirit, the Philippines presents the following recommendations for consideration by Tanzania. 1. Continue to implement inclusive education programs, including alternative learning opportunities for vulnerable groups. 2. Strengthen gender mainstreaming in national and local development planning and ensure the participation of women and other relevant stakeholders in the process. And 3. take further proactive measures to prevent and address trafficking in persons and reduce the vulnerability of groups that are most at risk. We wish Tanzania every success in this review cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Next is Poland with a video statement.
Participation in the UPR process, we commend Tanzania on its efforts to decrease the number of reported attacks against persons with albinism. We believe more needs to be done in order to address root causes of such attacks. We recommend to Tanzania to submit reports on the implementation of core international human rights treaties that Tanzania is a party to and to adhere or ratify the remaining ones. Take steps to promptly and effectively investigate and provide information on cases of arbitrary arrest and detention of political opponents, activists, protesters and dissenting journalists. Introduce amendments to the laws with a view to guarantee the right to education and to introduce 12 years of free primary and secondary education, of which 9 years were compulsory, and at least 1 year of free and compulsory pre-primary education, especially for girls and children with disabilities. We express concerns about restrictions on the exercise of the rights to freedom of expression and of association and the right of peaceful assembly, as well as with regard to the public access to information held by public authorities. I thank you.
The next speaker is Portugal with a video statement.
Chairperson, Portugal welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and notes with appreciation the increase of levels of investment in education for all, as well as the efforts made to combat human rights violations, abuses, and discrimination against persons with albinism through the increase of cooperation with all the stakeholders. Portugal recommends that Tanzania continue to strengthen its efforts to fight discrimination and violence and to eliminate human rights abuses against persons with albinism, fully abolish the death penalty in all circumstances, and ratify the second optional protocol of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Take concrete measures to tackle stigma and discrimination against persons affected by leprosy and their families, to ensure that they have timely and adequate access to health services and that they can enjoy their rights to education and to work without discrimination in line with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Thank you.
Next on the list is the Republic of Korea with a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea warmly welcomes a delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to its third cycle of the UPR. We welcome Tanzania's commitment to promoting and protecting human rights, in particular with respect to the rights of the child, by improving children's access to education. We also acknowledge Tanzania's efforts to combat violence against women through the adoption of the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Women and Children. In a constructive spirit, the Republic of Korea would like to present the following recommendations. First, continue efforts to ratify the Convention Against Torture. Second, create and maintain a safe and conducive environment where all political parties and civil society organizations can exercise their rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of political participation without fear of reprisal. And third, step up efforts on the legislative front to combat and punish all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls, including domestic violence, and take further measures to eliminate female genital mutilation. We wish Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker on the list is the Russian Federation with a video statement.
Thank you very much. We welcome the delegation of Tanzania and thank it for its report. We note progress in legal protection since the last UPR cycle. We support the continued efforts of the national authorities to strengthen national capacity in promoting and protecting human rights. We note the efforts of the government to reduce poverty and to promote socio-economic development. In connection with the remaining difficulties in the sphere of legal protection, the Russian Federation would make the following recommendations. 1. Ensure protection in legislation and in practice for vulnerable strata of the population, such as women, children, people with disabilities, the elderly, and ethnic minorities. 2. To continue to adopt measures to correct the situation in the work of courts and the penal system. Thank you.
Maintenant, je donne la parole.
I now call on the distinguished representative of Rwanda by Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Rwanda warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania, our brotherly neighbor, to the third cycle of the UPR and thank them for their informative and comprehensive report. We welcome the progress made by Tanzania since the second UPR cycle, including numerous normative and institutional measures to protect and promote human rights. Rwanda commends Tanzania for the introduction of mobile court services aimed at strengthening access to justice. We also commend Tanzania for free education policy for all children at primary and secondary levels of education. Rwanda recommends the following. 1, to ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. 2, to continue efforts to address all types of attacks against persons with albinism. 3, to continue efforts to combat all forms of discrimination against violence against women. We wish Tanzania a very successful review. I thank you.
Thank you.
I now call on the next speaker, the distinguished representative of Senegal, on Zoom.
Merci.
Thank you very much, sir. Senegal warmly welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and thanks it for presenting its national report. We congratulate the government for its development strategy up to 2025 and its second 5-year national development plan. We would like to make the following recommendations. Ensure that persons with albinism are given programs against poverty and special programs, and implement the recommendations accepted during its previous cycle on legislation to protect elderly persons. In conclusion, we wish Tanzania success in its UPR cycle. Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Is Serbia with a video statement?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Serbia welcomes the participation of the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania at the UPR session and thanks for presenting the national report. Serbia appreciates greatly the level of commitment of Tanzania to the UPR process. We welcome in particular its dedication to the human trafficking issue and in this context the adoption of the National Anti-Trafficking Action Plan of 2018. We would like to recommend to Tanzania to continue the fight against all forms of discrimination against women. Serbia wishes Tanzania a successful review process. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone on Zoom.
Mr. Vice President, Sierra Leone warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the third cycle UPR and thanks it for the presentation of the national report. My delegation commends the government for developing the National Human Rights Action Plan, Judiciary Strategic Plan, the National Plan of Action on Violence Against Women and Children, and the Legal Aid Act of 2017. In a constructive spirit, Sierra Leone recommends the following. 1, establish a moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty. 2, ratify and accede to CAT and ICPPED. And 3, consider to request technical assistance with a view to submitting overdue reports to the Committee of the ICESCR, CEDAW, and CRPD. 4, enhance efforts to combat all forms of gender-based violence against women, including domestic and sexual violence. And 5, enhance national infrastructure for the effective implementation of the National Human Rights Action Plan. We wish the Republic of Tanzania every success with this UPR cycle. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Slovenia for a video statement.
Excellencies, Slovenia wishes to commend the delegation of Tanzania for their national report, its presentation today, and their commitment to the UPR process. We would like to recommend to Tanzania 1, to amend the Law of Marriage Act from 1971 to set the minimum age of marriage to 18 for both boys and girls. 2, to review laws and policies to ensure that girls who fall pregnant whilst at school, are married, or young mothers can re-enter the formal education system. 3, to amend the Media Services Act of 2016 to comply with international standards. We commend Tanzania for important achievements reached in the field of human rights in the recent months, including on media freedom and right to health. We commend Tanzania also for concrete activities such as sensitization on the rights of persons with albinism, as well as amending the Education Act. At the same time, we would like to call on Tanzania to strengthen implementation of its own constitution, as well as relevant international treaties. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished representative of South Africa on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. South Africa welcomes the Honorable Professor Kabudi, Minister of Constitutional and Legal Affairs, and the distinguished delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to this UPR session. My delegation welcomes the government's efforts to facilitate access to justice through the enactment of the Legal Aid Act of 2017 and the decision in February 2021 that adopted Swahili as a legal language. In order to ensure progress in promoting and protecting human rights, South Africa wishes to respectfully recommend that United Republic of Tanzania, 1, continue to strengthen measures in combating violence against women and girls and fully implement the National Action Plan of Violence Against Women and Children. 2, enhance measures to prevent discrimination against all vulnerable groups, including all persons living with HIV and persons from the LGBTQI community. And 3, ratify all outstanding international human rights treaties it has committed to. South Africa wishes the United Republic of Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Sudan on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Republic of South Sudan welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thank them for the national report. My delegation congratulates Tanzanians' efforts for the improvement of the human rights situation in the country. This report signals the positive engagement of the Tanzania with the international human rights mechanism. South Sudan recommends the following. 1, recommend implementation of the third National 5-year Development Plan in line with the Development Vision 2025, the SDGs 2030, and the African Agenda 2063 in respect of the human and people's rights. 2, redoubling efforts to resolve the disparity in accessing water services in urban and rural areas. We wish Tanzania all the best and successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Spain for a video statement.
Spain welcomes the delegation of Tanzania. We applaud the progress made in combating female genital mutilation. However, given the worrying levels of violence against women and children, we'd recommend that the country allocate sufficient resources to the National Action Plan to end violence against women and children, and so as to thus strengthen the work to combat child and forced marriages. We are alarmed about setbacks in the area of civil freedoms and political rights and recommend that the country guarantee freedom of assembly, association, expression, and the press of all members of all political parties, communication media, and civil society organizations through reforming the computer crime law and the law on communications media. Spain regrets the persecution and discrimination suffered by LGBTI people and recommend that there be decriminalization of consensual sexual relations between adults of the same sex. We recommend that the country consider abolishing the death penalty in all cases and circumstances and ratifying the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the next speaker, Sri Lanka, for a video statement.
Madam President, Sri Lanka welcomes the delegation of Tanzania and appreciates the presentation made. We commend the ratification by Tanzania of the Marrakesh Treaty, the enactment of national laws, and amendments to guarantee gender equality. We also appreciate Tanzania's efforts in eradicating child labor through the development of a national strategy on the elimination of child labor with comprehensive coordination and collaboration mechanisms. We recognize Tanzania's remarkable achievements in facilitating women's participation in public affairs, including all arms of government, and the provision of free primary and secondary education to children. While recognizing the significant progress already achieved in a constructive spirit, Sri Lanka recommends that Tanzania continues efforts to increase school enrollments and enhance access to education, continues to promote access to justice for all through increased provision and coverage of legal aid, further advances the right to health through the allocation of resources to an improvement of infrastructure in the health sector. We wish Tanzania success in its UPR engagement. Thank you.
And the next speaker is the State of Palestine with a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. The State of Palestine welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the third cycle of the UPR, and we thank them for the presentation of their national report. We commend the government's commitment to promote and protect human rights, including the steps taken in implementing the Tanzania Development Vision 2025. And we also welcome the ongoing efforts in improving education, including through implementing the Secondary Education Quality Improvement Program with the objective of empowering girls. In this regard, the State of Palestine wishes to make the following recommendations to the United Republic of Tanzania. 1. To continue its efforts with regard to education and to adopt policies to enhance the quality of education and ensure inclusion in education for girls and children with disabilities. 2. To extend a standing invitation to special procedure mechanisms. 3. To continue to adhere to more international human rights conventions. We wish Tanzania a successful review. I thank you.
The next speaker is Sweden by video statement.
Madam President, Sweden acknowledges that Tanzania has ratified many important international conventions on human rights, both within the United Nations and the African Union. However, serious concerns remain over the lack of an independent judiciary, the limitations to conduct free and fair elections, and the restrictions on media and the freedoms of expression, assembly, and association. Sweden would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Ensure access to justice, including by addressing the use of non-bailable offenses, targeting politicians, businessmen, journalists, and human rights defenders, and ensure it complies with due process standards. 2. Enable future free, fair, and transparent elections by undertaking political and electoral reforms, including the implementation of the recommendations issued in the final report of the EU Election Observation Mission to Tanzania of 2015. 3. Ensure through dialogue and technical support that the different laws and regulations governing the media sector, for example, Cybercrimes Act 2015, Media Services Act 2016, Access to Information Act 2016, Electronic and Postal Communications Regulations 2020, are in full compliance with human rights, including freedom of expression. I thank you.
Je donne la parole à la Suisse.
I give the floor to Switzerland for a pre-recorded statement. My delegation extends a welcome to the delegation of Tanzania. Switzerland commends the fresh momentum that has been seen in the area of human rights under the new government and recalls the importance of making this tangible as soon as possible through continuing reforms. In this context, Switzerland would like to make the following recommendations to the authorities of Tanzania. First, that it abolish the death penalty and commute all death sentences to alternative punishment. Second, that it ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading punishments or treatments. And third, that it protect freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association, that it adapt the laws limiting these freedoms to international standards, and combat impunity for attacks targeting journalists, human rights defenders, and peaceful political actors in accordance with Target 16.10 of the SDGs. Fourth, that the country repeal customary laws which undermine women's land ownership rights, such as Order GN Number 436, 1963 of Local Customary Law, Declaration Number 4, and strengthen institutions dealing with land administration. Thank you.
And I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We welcome the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thank the delegation for the presentation on the development in the normative and institutional framework for the protection and promotion of human rights, as well as on the challenges and obstacles that Tanzania continues to address in cooperation with national, regional, and international partners.
Tanzania has ratified many important international conventions on human rights,
to ensure
both within the
effective
United
enjoyment
Nations
of
and
the
the
rights
African
to
Union.
safe drinking
However,
water and the
serious
right to
concerns
health, which
remain
are
over the lack of
reflected
an
in a
independent
package of plans
judiciary,
and programs that resulted in increasing the access to the basic services related to the implementation of these rights. We recommend the following. Continue to implement national policies and programs aimed at empowering persons with disabilities. Second, continue to implement the national legal framework for the protection of natural resources and their effective use in the context of realizing the right to development. We wish Tanzania every success in the national efforts to promote and protect human rights. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Madam. And I give the floor to Thailand for a video statement.
And welcome the delegation of United Republic of Tanzania to the third UPR cycle. We are pleased to learn that the government National 5-Year Development Plan is in line with the SDGs and encourage the integration of gender dimension in implementing the Tanzania Development Vision 2025. While commending positive development in gender-related areas, such as the adoption of National Plan of Action to end violence against women and children, and the criminalization of female genital mutilation, Thailand notes that the incident of gender-based violence continue to exist. We therefore recommend the United Republic of Tanzania to undertake further measures to prevent domestic violence and marital rape and ensure that all victims receive necessary assistance. Thailand also recommends that the United Republic of Tanzania accelerate the adoption of the overdue Second National Human Rights Action Plan 2018-2022 and implement it with a view to mainstream human rights in different policy and programs. I thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker on the list is the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Timor-Leste warmly welcomes the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and thanks them for the presentation of the national report. We take positive note of the steps taken by the government of Tanzania to improve human rights in its territory. We note with appreciation that the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance of Tanzania has been accredited with A status in accordance with the Paris Principles, and that Tanzania has conducted several initiatives to tackle corruption, including adopting a Public Leadership Code of Ethics Act. While welcoming the measures adopted by the government of Tanzania to protect persons with albinism, Timor-Leste wishes to recommend the United Republic of Tanzania, 1, to ensure that persons with albinism are covered by the anti-poverty programs, 2, to strengthen community policing and the role of security committees in each village with the view of promoting the safety of persons with albinism, and 3, to take further steps to ensure the respect of the rights of freedom of expression and a peaceful assembly. Timor-Leste wishes the United Republic of Tanzania a successful UPR outcome. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you.
The next speaker on my list is Togo with a video recording, a video message. Madam President, Togo extends a warm welcome to the delegation of the United Republic of Tanzania and congratulates it on presenting its national report, which sets out the variety of measures adopted by the government to give effect to the recommendations accepted during the last review. Togo encourages Tanzania to be steadfast in its efforts to ensure better enjoyment of human rights in the country and would submit the following recommendations. First, that it intensify action undertaken as part of the work to combat discrimination against persons with albinism, particularly ensuring that these people benefit from programs to fight poverty through special measures. Second, that it take the necessary measures to allow young girls who are pregnant to have access to education without suffering from discrimination in accordance with national and international human rights obligations. In conclusion, the Togolese delegation wishes a successful UPR to Tanzania and all success in implementing the recommendations that are accepted. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Je donne la parole.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Madagascar via Zoom. I would invite Madagascar to take the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Madagascar thanks the United Republic of Tanzania for its report under this current UPR cycle. Madagascar applauds the ongoing effort made by Tanzania over the last 5 years to protect and promote human rights, particularly concerning the measure undertaken by the former president in 2020, alleviating sentences ranging from the death penalty to life imprisonment. In this respect, Madagascar urges that Tanzania ratify the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and that it abolish death penalty the death penalty, replacing it by fair, proportionate penalties that are aligned with international human rights norms. Thus, Madagascar recommends that Tanzania adopt a formal moratorium on executions, looking forward to abolishing the death penalty, and wishes it all success in its commitments to the protection and promotion of human rights. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the last speaker on today's list of speakers.
To the Honorable Professor Kabudi, Minister for Constitutional and Legal Affairs, to address observations and comments and to make his final remarks. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for your leadership. And let me also take this occasion to thank member states for their contributions to our national report. It is a great honor that a number of countries, and according to my list, 95, have contributed their views and comments to our submission. We appreciate your views, which have been transparent, supporting, and will guide us towards improving our efforts in order to fully adhere to our human rights obligation. So far, it has certainly been a fruitful deliberation. I will not try to answer and respond to all the 95 contributions, but highlights just a very few issues that might be pertinent at this juncture. One, I would want to say that Tanzania falls under the Anglo-Saxon common law tradition, which means judicial decisions are also part of law. And if you look at the corpus of the decisions of the courts in Tanzania on human rights, they are robust, dynamic, and they have also been trendsetters in the Commonwealth. If you read the law reports of the Commonwealth on human rights jurisprudence, Tanzania contributes a lot. And the decisions of the court actually have improved dramatically the situation of human rights. So when we look at the laws and other programs, we also need to look at the decisions of the courts in Tanzania. For example, under the Constitution of Tanzania, nobody is supposed to be treated like a convict, which means there's presumption of innocence. And the state is required to prove beyond reasonable doubt of any criminal offense which it profiles against a person in court. This includes people who are involved or alleged to be involved in same-sex relations. And we have a very interesting decision by the High Court of Tanzania in the case of Mwana Hamis Abdallah versus Hamis and the Republic in 1986 Tanzania Law Reports of 265, where the court clearly said the onus of proof of same-sex relations, which are prohibited by the law in Tanzania, is strictly on the part of the state to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the offense was actually committed. On the question of abolition of death penalty, as we have stated, in the last 27 years, there have been no execution of death penalty in Tanzania. However, the matter was taken to court up to the level of the Court of Appeal in the case of Mbushu versus Dominic Minology and another. This is the 1995 Tanzania Law Reports, which ruled that death penalty did not violate Article 13 sub Article 6E of the Constitution of the Republic of Tanzania, which prohibits torture or inhuman or death. Now is the whole question of enjoyment of freedoms and rights in Tanzania. They are enshrined in our Constitution, but no right or freedom is absolute. So Article 30 sub Article 2 of our Constitution provides limitations to the enjoyment of freedoms and rights enshrined in the Constitution. And the Court of Appeal has gone far to define the kind of restrictions which are acceptable in the interest of all of you. It is very clear that these are on matters of public health, on matters of public morality, on matters of public safety, on matters of public peace, on matters of, as I said, maintaining a secular state in Tanzania. And this is clearly shown in the case of Kukutia Ole Pumbuni versus Attorney General, which is a 1993 Tanzania Law Reports case of 159, where it says limitations to enjoyment of our freedoms and rights should be It should not be arbitrary, and it should be proportional. So if you look at that, there is actually safeguards within the Constitution to make that everybody enjoys freedoms. However, as I've said, no one is above the law. On amendments to the Political Parties Act as well as the NGO Act, many issues have been ignored which actually are in that right. One, the amendments was made in the Political Parties Act and the NGO Act in order to ensure transparency and accountability of financial matters, taking into account that we are living now in a very precarious world where if you're not careful, finances to extreme violent elements can go through that process. So it applies to all political parties, including the one which is now governing the country and the opposition parties, to lay bare all their finances to ensure that there's no infiltration of funds which will go and finance extreme. But another thing was to ingrain in all political parties the secular nature of political affairs in Tanzania. But another one was to include women in all levels of leadership. There were political parties where women were not visible in their leadership, but also to inculcate the nature of intra-party democratic elections after every 5 years. So there are areas which have been improved in those areas. On the question of freedom of expression and the freedom of media, people ignore that. Journalists in Tanzania, many of them in the private sector, had no salaries, had no contract of employment, had no social security. And the law there now imposes obligations to private media owners and state media owners to give journalists contracts of employment to ensure they have social security, but also protect them from other kind of lack of security in their employment. There are areas to improve, but those were the pertinent questions which were addressed by those laws in Tanzania in matters. On question of access to land on women, we have done tremendous. I would want to point out that actually many people are overwhelmed with the fact that in Tanzania we have two family systems. 80% are patrilineal, which means are patriarchal societies, and 20% are matrilineal, which means matriarchal percent. In the matrilineal system, the question of land, access to land, is not an issue. But we have enacted the Village Land Act, where women are given equal access to land, be it in general land or in village land. And for the first time in our Village Land Act, quorum for village land councils can only be attained if the women are in attendance. If women are not in attendance, although the quorum has been met by the attendance of men, the meeting will not be considered to have been taken place. So there are many areas which, indeed, we have made very big progress. And I wanted to point out that actually in Tanzania, no one has been persecuted because of his political belief, his ideology, his religion, and any kind of formation. In the last 60 years, we have made big progress. But as I said, no country is perfect. And for sure, the next 60 years we would want to improve more. And Tanzania is a child of the UN. We were a League of Nations mandated territory. We are a trusted of the United Nations. And for us, multilateralism and all normative principles of the UN matter a lot to Tanzania. As I said earlier, we are committed and value the importance of the adherence to human rights that benefit the governance of our country. We further wish to reiterate the commitment of the United Republic of Tanzania to the work of the Human Rights Council and to the Universal Periodic Review process. And we are looking forward to come again to the fourth review of UPR. I convey once again the appreciation of the United Republic of Tanzania to the Troika and to the UPR Secretariat for all the assistance we received. And more to you, Mr. Vice President, for ably chairing this meeting. Indeed, I thank you.
I thank His Excellency and the delegation of Tanzania for the presentation and participation in this review. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, namely the representatives of Bangladesh, Gabon, and the Russian Federation. In accordance with the procedure implemented since 2015, the recommendations section is scheduled for distribution on the 9th of November, Tuesday, at 12:30 p.m. and will be adopted on the same day as from 2:30 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by mail on Friday, the 19th of November 2021. This brings us to the end of our meeting. We will reconvene on Monday at 9 a.m. for the review of Eswatini. Speaking time will be 1 minute and 25 seconds for all. Inscribed speakers who wish to withdraw from the list are kindly invited to inform the Secretariat at the latest 30 minutes before the start of the review. I hereby close the 8th meeting of the 39th UPR Working Group session.